the course of the day, you have 2-in-1. You have how you can manage dates and time. Then you will be shown how you can document your code such that you have explanations for all your code portions, as well as you've got inheritance of classes. So when thinking about your date, it is different than the one which you know as a human. So the machine expresses it in milliseconds, and it is counted since the 1st of January in the year 1970. And this is based on epoch. So you will have periods of time. They are simply transformed from the amount of time in milliseconds via the amount of time which is human readable, such that you've got a month, your date, your year. And when you call date in this way, this will simply display the current system date based on your machine. And when you add this millisecond value between the parentheses, it will simply transform it. And out of the machine time, it will be transformed into human time. Then you can have the toString. This will be based on multiple details. You've got exactly which is your global mean time, whether it's with plus or minus, date, time in milliseconds, as well as year. So you see that you've got many details about it. Also, you have the function with getTime. Now, getTime needs to return a result of long because all time is expressed in milliseconds, okay, which is in fact a value. Then you can also set time, and set time is also based on a long value expressed on a numerical value in milliseconds. Also, you have a Boolean result which you can obtain whether or not your date comes after or before a certain date. So you provide it as an argument. So for example, when using date, you will have to import the package which is java.util.date. And according to it, you get your current date. So current date is when you call the function new date, and then you can print it. So when you print it in this way, you have it with this East European time. And this is why you have EE, East European, and T for time. And this will be exactly the date. You have the month, year, and then you've got the hour, minute, seconds, as well as you can get the time in milliseconds. You have the function with get time. Then you can provide another value with new date. And based on new date, you can provide it in this way with L for long at the end. And this means that this date corresponds to 2008. And it will be the 10th of January at a certain hour, which is 23:20. Then what you can do is to also add some time for it. For example, you can add it in this way, and it will be the updated day, which you can display, and it will be Tuesday, the 22nd of January, 2008. So you simply manage the value in which is provided as a long. Then you can compare and you can see whether or not a date comes before or after based on the current date. So according to the current date, which is your origin in time, you want to find it out whether it comes after date 1 or not. So whether it is true, it will return after. Whether it is false, it will return the second argument. And then you can simply display, and it will say that the current date comes after the date 1, which was given based on a long value. Also, what you can do is to subtract the time, and it will simply display the new date which resulted. So keep in mind that you have all your days, including the last day of February when you have your year, okay, with leap year or not, so whether it has 29 days or not. Then you have the local. Local is when you have different regions. So based on different regions, you've seen that you have another way of ordering your date, month. So this is when you can provide it based on local with the language as well as the country. So for example, the language will be in lowercase, N for English, or you've got FR for French, as well as the countries can be US, or for United States, you have FR in uppercase for France, or you can have Great Britain. Such that when you want it to be displayed, okay, in a certain way of writing based on the language, it will be with local.english, as well as you've got this local with N in this way, whether you do not want to say which is the country. Or you can put it with US, and you can have the English, which is associated with the country, which is United States. Also, you can have it by default, so according to your system, and you've got the get default as well as to set the default to be a certain local, which you define here. Then based on it, what you can know is to get the country. So maybe you've got the system when you have different logs, and for those logs, you want to find out which is the country associated to it, or the language, the name. Okay. And this means that you can have the get display of country, or to get display country based on a local way of writing it. So you have date, month, year, as well as it depends how you store them inside the database. Then you can have the display language, okay, based on the one which is associated, whether it's English, French, and so on, as well as you've got a display name for it. Okay. Well, let's see. Everything can also be stored based on calendar, and this is in fact an abstract class, and it is used for knowing which is the date and time of the day, such that based on it you can find which is the current calendar instance based on the get instance method, as well as you can have it based on a local. So instead of using the Gregorian calendar, you can have an instance of this calendar. And it means that for a date, you can get the time, as well as you can set time based on this provided argument. So here for calendar, what you can do is to get the current instance. So you get instance, and then you can get based on the year, based on the month, such that you can have, for example, the week of year, the week of the month, as well as the day of year, day of month, simple date which contains everything. Then you can have year, month, hour, hour of day. Okay, also the minutes, seconds, or maybe you want it expressed in milliseconds. So it depends how you have it stored and managed by your system. So when you have an instance of calendar, you can get month, date, week, and keep in mind that you start counting from 0. So in fact, January is month 0. Okay. Then you can have exactly the dates. Also, you can have the day as being Sunday, or you can have it as being the month with January, February, and you can have this calendar that's set. So in fact, you can have the calendar that's set and to say that the month which I want is January. So maybe based on your program, you want, maybe you have some clients, they subscribe to some services, and you want to have to compute which is the expiry date. And in this way, you can use calendar, as well as you have the void set. So it means that you can say which is the year, month, or day of the month, as well as you've got the minutes and the seconds. So maybe let's say that you've got an assignment and you want it to be on time, and you can simply change these arguments regarding the month, date, and hour. Okay, so all right. Also, you can add some fields. So, for example, you can add an amount of hours in milliseconds, and then you can compare it based on another calendar value. Such that, let's see, maybe you've got the calendar, you get the current instance, so you call it with get time. Based on get time, you simply have the date, And according to it, you will have a new date that you create, being a date 2 of this long value. And according to it, you can set a calendar to be date 2. And when you want to get the current time, in fact, it will be the time which is associated to this instance. Then you can even set the day of month to be 2510, and you can say that it's 1999, and you have with get time, it will be before you were born. Okay, then you can also add 10 months after this event, and you can compute which time results, as well as you can do the rolling, and you will have exactly for your month. You see that you add another year to pass. Now, this is how you can do it, or what you can have is another date format. So it is also abstract, and this is based on formatting and parsing dates and time. So you get your current instance of date and time, then you can set it based on a certain style on how you want to order your month, date, as well as year, based on local, as well as instead of date, you can have it for time or for date time. So combine as well as date and the time based on your local value. So for example, here you have it with a style which can be long, full, short, or medium, such that based on your date, whether you want the full format, it will use the DF, which is the date format, and you get the time instance. For the time instance, you want the full time to be used, meaning that you've got the date, you've got the month, year, as well as time. Also, when you've got the short, it won't write anymore December or Thursday. It will simply add, in fact, firstly the month, then you've got the day, year, and time. As well as for the daytime, you can have it in a short format, and it means that it will neglect the East European time as well as the seconds. So when parsing it, here you've got the date, and you can have the full time as here. Then you can display it. So for date 2, what you can use df parse, and with this df parse you can have the df format of date. So meaning that for what you've got here for date, you can have it displayed not at Thursday, but at few. Okay, so you've got the abbreviated version, and you've got the short version also for the month. Now this is how you can display it. Then it will simply neglect this PM, it will simply put the hour based on a 24-hour format date. Also, you can have the short format. So when you have for the time, the short, so you have got the date. First, you've got a date for it, and it will be short, as well as you've got the time, which will be full. So here you've got the 13th of December, as well as you've got the time. Also, what you can use is to have the format based on it, and it will simply display it in this way. So you have it based on a certain date. When you have the date format, it will simply, with this DF parse of DF format, it will show it in this shorter way. Also, what you can have is for the date and time. So you have January as being the first month of 0. And also you have immutable classes. So it means that you cannot change them. So here you've got the local date time. So you can have it for the current date, which is local date.now as a method. And even what you can do is to have it based on a certain period in time, like I want exactly my date, which is the 10th of May of 2021. And it means that for it, you can store also. So whenever you've got a variable, you write it in lowercase, okay? And then you can have it in this camel case. So always you start with lowercase, and then you can concatenate based on the context and meaning of your variable. As well as what you can compute is the 60th day of a certain year. So meaning that you've got the local date for which you've got the method that you will call of year day. So as you can see, the order is year and then day. So it means that 2021, I want this date, which is 65th. And this one will be displayed. Okay. Then what I can do is to get the month. So for a date, I have the get month. Also, I can have it as a value. And in this case, you see that the value retrieved for February will be 2 when using such a date as before. And then I can even get which is the length for it, or even the day of week, so whether it's Monday, Tuesday, and so on. Even the value for it, so it is like before for February. Then you've got the current year, okay, which is 2021, as well as whether I want the year which is 2000. And then I want to check whether it's a leap year or not. So having on February, during the month of February, 29 days, so it will return false. Okay, as well as you've got the length. So you can play around, and for the length, it means how many days does your year contain. So by changing just the values, you find out exactly how many days are left, so let's say, until a subscription will expire, if it is until the end of the year. Then you've got the local time. So the local time which you retrieve based on the local time that's now as a function, as well as you can set it as a time. So the midday to be in fact 12:00, as well as you can set it based on which are the hours, the minutes, and seconds. So you've got the local time dot off, and you retrieve so such a value is retrieved for you. What you can do is to find out which is the next day. This is mostly important when you've got a date at the end of the month and the following one is on the next month. So it means that you've got the local date now, you've got the current time, and what you can do is to add another day. So you've got this plus of days of 1. Also, what you can have is to subtract the time. So maybe based on the current date, current time, you can simply subtract 5 hours as well as 30 minutes. And whenever you've got the time, so you've got the instant now, and if you've got this epoch time, it means that everything is counted starting with the 1st of January, 1970. And what you can do is based on the time, you can even add some seconds. So you have this plus 10 seconds. And also you have the period of time. So between two dates, so based on year, month, days, as well as you've got a duration. It can be expressed in seconds or nanoseconds. And for example, you've got the first day, which you provide based on year, month, and day, so being this one, as well as you've got the second date. So again, based on year, month, and day. Based on it, okay, you create a period. So this period you provide it as being between the first, the start date, and the end date, which is the second date. Then for it, what you do have is, so when changing the time here, you can change it between them. You will have to get the days, which are counted. You can get the months, as well as you can get the year. Okay. Then for it, you can check whether or not the period is negative, meaning that whether the start time comes after, okay, the end time. So this is just to check whether the period is good or not. And also you have the instance, so you can provide a date as not being given in this way with year, month, and days, but as a time interval. And according to it, with milliseconds, it will simply have the epoch of a second, and in this way, it will simply transform, which is exactly the duration between them. Okay? And you have duration between based on the first interval, and I mean the first time and the second time. Okay. What you can also do based on your code is to document your code. So this is when you've got a description of your preconditions, postconditions, exceptions, what your function returns, what your class does. So also what you can have is to have the auto-generating code documentation according to your source file. So this is what exists inside the comments and annotation. And in this way, you can simply have it as an HTML form. Well, let's see. When you've got the Java documentation, you think that you need to document a class to know exactly what it does. You want to know which are the attributes of each and every class. Then you've got the constructor. So constructors with the default constructor with nothing as an input argument, or you can have more or less arguments for your constructor. Because maybe you want some values to be set by default and some not to be set because it will be simply added afterwards. Then you've got the packages. So this is like you've seen before for each and every functionality, you isolate them and they need to be coherent, as well as you should maintain a low coupling between the packages. Okay. Then you've got the block tags, such that according to it, you can have this one with the slash, and then you have the star star. And here, when you've got comments, you have it in this way with a slash star. And the first line of your Java doc syntax would be with 2 stars after the slash. Then what you can know about the code is who is the author, which are the parameters, which is the return value, whether or not some exceptions are thrown, as well as to see some details about it. So for example, here, you can have a point class, and the point class will simply have the description in this way. You see that it is not a simple slash and star. You have 2 stars to be included inside the Java documentation. And here it will be about a point which has 2 coordinates, x and y, and you store them as being integer values. So for this one, you will have a public class point. For it, you provide which is the value for the x coordinate as well as the y coordinates. You get a private int x and a private int y. For it, you will have to create a constructor. Okay, so it means that you will have the same name as for the class. So it is point. Okay, the method will be public. And you will have the 2 parameters, int x and int y, such that for the current context being this, so for the current object that you create, you want to set x, this x to be equal to the value which was provided, being the input parameter, as well as my y, which was declared here, I want to initialize it with the value that I provide here inside the method. Also, you have, by default, you have the default constructor. So a default constructor is one which doesn't have any input arguments. So for example, here you would have the origin. So it means that whether you do not have any input arguments, you would set x and y as being 0. Then you would have the get of x, so that when I want to return x, after public, I need to have exactly the value of my x, and my x is int. So this is why it is written as being a public int get x. And also all the methods, the method names are written with camel case, so starting with lowercase, and then you add argument by argument, while you've got the name of the class, which is written with uppercase. Then for this one, when you want to return x, it means that you will have an int value. So you write it as being a public int get of x with no argument. Because if you want to get something, it means that you need to return it. And whether this doesn't depend on another value, then you've got nothing as an input argument. Such that you will return x. And because also you don't need to compute anything for y, you need to return also y as being inside a method of type int. So the return value is int, and you have this accessibility, which is public. Then you've got also the name, suggestive name of the method with getY. So here, as you can see, what you have inside the whole documentation, it simply says about what refers to the class. So you have a point with two coordinates, x and y, and they are of integer precision. So this is specified, okay, as not being any float value. Then you've got x. So x would be what? X would be, in fact, the coordinate of my point. So this is when you write this code as being point, because this one is, in fact, the class, and it will simply be displayed. This is like in web programming. You have it simply found with these tags. Then you've got the y coordinate. So the y coordinate, this y is in fact the coordinate. So this is why you specify it in the same way. And don't forget you have the slash and two stars after it. And you close it with a star and a slash. Then when you've got the constructor, this means that for the attributes which characterize a point, x and y, you need to specify it as a description that you want to create a point of two coordinates, x and y, and also what you need to do is to specify which is the scope of each and every parameter, such that x and y, they are parameters, so you need to introduce them with @param of x, as well as for y, you provide the same thing. Then what you do have here is that you have the default constructor. So you will say that this is in fact your origin of your space, of your 2D space. And also for get x, it will simply have to return the x coordinate based on an integer precision. So you need to specify which is the meaning of this int. Okay, so it is in fact your x coordinate. So you see that you have the @return, such that based on what is returned, the value of x, you have the @return, and then you've got the x coordinate for it, which you provide. Also, you will have to get the toString. So don't forget that when you want to display an object of a certain class, without having the toString method, it will simply display the address space. And this is why you need to write it as being a function which is named toString, and you have the return type, which is string, such that inside it you have the return. You put it between quotes x as being equal to. Then you need to have the plus x, such that the value of x will be returned, as well as you've got the y, and for y you need to get the value associated to it. Okay, then you would like to move this point. So in fact, you provided as a description that you want to do the translation of the point based on two coordinates. And now you will have to say that you have an @parameter, and this one will be named delta x. So this is used when you want to translate x on the x-axis, as well as the second parameter, which is delta y, is used for translating the y coordinate on the y-axis. So it means that for x will be updated, and you will have to add the value, which is delta x, to my previous value. And the same thing I do for y. So y is in fact the updated value with this delta y. Then for it, you see that you have this documentation, and it will simply display which is the distance between 2 points as being the square root. And in this way, you will have, for 2 points, you have all the coordinates. So it means that you will have to return, which is the distance, the Euclidean distance between 2 points. And in this way, you have a result which is of type double. So as you can see, you need to specify that the result is of type double. So maybe you want to use it afterwards and you want to set it, to initialize it for an int variable. So this will simply trigger an error. And this is why you also add it inside the description of the code. Then you have parameter by parameter. So you have the at param of x1 as being the x coordinate of the first point. You also get the at x parameter, which is x2. So as you can see, you get them one by one as they appear in your code. And your x2 will be the x coordinate of your second point. Then you have the parameter y1, which is the y coordinate of the first point, and y2 is the y coordinate of the second point. Based on it, you simply have to return the distance between them. You have the at return, and whether you want to check the formula, you have the at c, and you can provide a certain resource. So as for web programming, you have an anchor, and for the anchor, you have reference. So you have the href as a header, and it will simply display, which is this website for the Euclidean distance, okay, inside the anchor. For it, you can call it from outside, so based on the class name, and this is why you've got static, and this is based on the input coordinates of point 1 and point 2, such that you've got x1 and y1, and respectively x2 and y2 for the second point. For it, you need to return the distance as being the square root of exactly x1 minus x2 squared. Okay, so this is why it is multiplied twice, plus the difference between y1 and y2 also squared. Then for testing it, you have the JUnit. So JUnit is used for testing in Java based on annotations, such that you can have the input for which you can provide the preconditions, as well as you've got the output for the pass conditions. So also in both cases, you can check whether they are positive or negative, so whether they were validated or not. So for example, for the point, you can have a point test. So this will be, in fact, you have the default constructor. And here you will have a test move method for the class point. So as you can see, you have the add test. You've also got the Java doc with slash with star in order to simply describe this function. And here you have for the test, you have a display name. So you have the add display name of test move method. So it means that you've got a delta x and a delta y to move your point. So it means that you've got an instance of a point as being new point of 0, 0, being the origin. Then you would like to move this point. So it means that you've got the instance, you need to call the method .move. And this is done based on your input parameter, delta x and delta y. Then what you can do is to simply check it. So whenever you've got the test, you need to verify it based on the assert equals method. So with this 5, you want to check whether 5 is exactly what is returned by the method instance of get x, so being the new x for the point. Or if not, it will simply say that the move method failed. And the same is done for y, whether or not it is of the same value. Then what you can do is to check the distance method, such that you've got again the Java doc with the slash and the star. You've got the add test for your JUnit testing. And for the method, you've got the name that you want to test the distance method. For the distance, you need to provide all 4 coordinates. So you have x1 coordinate for point 1, x2 coordinate for point 2, y1 coordinate for point 1, as well as y2 coordinate for point 2. Then the expected result, which is provided by the program, is this one over here, 4006, comma, and you've got the 0785. And this means that first you need to obtain, which is the result, and you store it inside a double variable, okay, which is exactly this one. So based on x1, x2, okay, as well as y1, y2. And I want to have the assert equals of the expected result. I've got my result. And then here I have the 4 digits after the comma, based on which it will simply be compared. And if not, whether it's not the case, then it will say that the distance failed. So when testing it, you need to have the x and y coordinates as being positive. So for example, you will have to create this constructor. You have the point of x and y, and whether you've got x less than 0 or you've got y less than 0, it will simply throw an exception. So you don't need to continue anymore. And whether it is not the case, then you will have to set x as being my input value, as well as y as being my input value for the function. So x is in fact the x coordinate of the point, which needs to be positive, as well as y also needs to be positive. Then you also say that you have this exception. So this exception is marked inside your documentation as being a throw case based on an illegal argument exception. And this is caused by the fact that you've got x or you've got y less than 0. So this is how you can write it such that it can be checked. Also, what you can do is to add another test case. And this one is marked by @test. Then for the display name, you need to say what it does exactly. So here you will have a constructor with negative inputs. So you will have the public void method, inside which you've got x equal to 0 and y equal to -5. Then what you will have here is to assert throws that you've got an illegal argument exception class for those arguments. So for the current class, you will simply have the new point based on the 2 coordinates, x and y. And whether it is the case, you provide it in this way, whether it is not, so you have the false, it will say that you don't have any exception thrown by negative values. So here, this is like in this code, for example, you've got a multiplication test based on A and B. So you can ignore a test. So you've got a multiplication test, you've got an instance of this class, and you want to do the assert equals based on the message name and which is the returned value. Okay, so let's say that it is this one. I write it as being a test. Okay, and I want to run them both. So in this way, it will say what it expects. So it expects 0, but it's not. Okay, it wasn't the case. It was having the value 1. And now we have both tests which passed because they are the correct ones. So 10 multiplied by 0 is in fact 0. So this is what is expected. And then we have based on what do we evaluate. So we evaluate exactly the instance of the class test, this multiplication test. And we provide the 2 arguments for A and B as being 10 and 0. And here I can have ignore. And when having ignore, it will simply not be evaluated any longer. JUnit ignore. This is the one. Okay, based on JUnit. insert exactly. I will simply not test. And got a break. Come on. Test. So both of them are over here. This is the JUnit star. That's it. Okay. But it still wants a JUnit from it. Okay. So even here, if I go, it will simply say that it's inside the org JUnit. So whether you write it here or you put the star, it still needs to work. Then what you can have is when you want to generalize a concept. So this is why before, when you create a hierarchy and you've got the super types, and the other will simply extend the classes. So you will extend a certain behavior. So for example, this is when you think that the most abstract part is in fact the object. And after the object, you've got a life form. So for example, inside the life form, we think of a human. Based on human, you can have them as being women, men, you've got employees. And here, employees are inside the company of both genders, as well as you've got the property owner, okay, which is in fact another human with a certain role. Then for the media store, this is according to property owner, as well as you've got an employee, and you refer to a live form because you simply have to advertise some services. So for this generalization, in fact, you have it as being transitive and it's anti-symmetric, as well as based on inheritance. What you do have is to have new attributes, as well as you will have methods, and you will simply modify their behavior. So this is when, based on what you want to update, so to have multiple ways of defining it, it will have the extent. So here you've got firstly an object. Then this one is abstract. Based on it, you will have a live form. So you've got the live form, which will extend the object. And this is when you have a generalization. Then you've got the human. So the human is different than another life form, which is a dog, a cat, and so on. And for it, for the human, you have them based on genders. So you have woman, which extends human, as well as man, which extends human, and even the employee. Then for this one, you see that you have some characteristics, but in fact, the child is different than the life which is simply done by a certain employee, so lived by a certain employee. And for it, you simply have to think of this hierarchy and how you can have them organized, knowing that all the classes extend the object. And now you've also got the attributes. So keep in mind that all the attributes of your superclass, whether you do not have them as being private, so you specify them as being public, they will be accessible for those classes which are underneath. So for this one, the employee, I will write it as being a public class employee, which will simply extend human. Then you've also got the methods. Also, you have the private attributes, whether they are defined like that, you can simply have access to them via the public methods, which are the getters, setters, as well as you can have subclasses. So it means that you will have shadows for the attributes of the superclass. And in this way, you also have the super. So whenever you have a constructor, the constructor of employee, it will simply call with super some characteristics of human. Okay. As well as for inheritance, so keep in mind that your constructors are not inherited. You need to write them. Then for calling for some attributes of the superclass, you will simply have the super keyword for it, as well as whether you do not have the default constructor, okay, you will have a simply error. So keep in mind that you can define your constructor, but it's really good to have the empty one when somebody else wants to create just an instance of a class and then to update it. Then for the constructor of the superclass, you call it with super, as well as for the constructor, you can have just one super, okay, as well as just one with this to call it based on all the attributes which you've got. So for example, you can have a person has a name, a person will make a number, a birthday, and they can move to another address in life. And now I've got my employee, and any employee is characterized. Also, it's in fact a person, so they do have a name, a personal maker number, and a birthday, as well as a salary, so that you can increase the salary of the person. And the manager, it will simply extend the employee. You have the salary, and the manager has access to all the salaries of the employees inside the company. So in the following part, I will present exactly this example. So for now, you have a short break. And I will return.